Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. I got a request this week to talk a little bit about single sign-on. Single sign-on is a practice where you can sign into one service with your username and password, credentials, we'll say, and from there, you don't have to do a login to separate services. You can just go wherever you need to and access what you need. This is something that is very common in a domain networked environment, and there are ways of doing it on the internet as well. Think of anything where you've signed in and it says, use your Google account to sign in. And you're like, great, I can just use my Google account and I don't have to sign up for a separate account with this other service here. This is all methods of single sign-on. But how you do it can be very different, and there are different protocols for making this work. So I'm going to start by talking about the granddaddy, or what I consider to be the granddaddy of them all, and that is Kerberos. Kerberos, which takes its name from the three-headed dog Cerberus, but Kerberos is spelt with a K in this case. Kerberos is a network protocol. Version 5 was actually written down in spec in 1993. And it was updated in 2005 to add a little bit more modernity to it. What a word that was. But it added things like AES, and standardized a few other things. So Kerberos, as it stands, version 5 was in 1993. It's still version 5 now, but with some updated cipher spec and other extensions in 2005. And Kerberos is the major authentication protocol in use in Windows Active Directory domain environments. So, how does this work? Because if it's in Windows domains, you've probably been using Kerberos anyway without even knowing it. And I'll warn you, it's complicated. I'm going to try and break it down into individual pieces for you, but this is complicated stuff. So it's also possible that I will misspeak. And if I say something that turns out to be inaccurate later, I apologize in advance. But we're going to try and walk through this step by step. Okay, so in Kerberos, we've got a few different pieces that are all involved. And I say a few, I mean a lot of different pieces that are involved. The goal here, however, is that you should never be transmitting passwords across the network at all. You should be able to ensure that both parties, the client workstation and the server, can mutually authenticate each other. They both know for sure that they're talking with the correct party. And because this is passing over networking infrastructure that you might not want to consider trusted, you want to make sure that people can't capture a response and then replay it later. So all of these are also confirming that the transmission and the response are all within a very narrow band of time. So there's lots of timestamps involved. In order to make this all work, you need a trusted central party that can arbitrate a lot of different things. In Kerberos, this is often referred to as the Key Distribution Center, the KDC. And in fact, that's a service in Windows, the Key Distribution Center. You can't, generally speaking, stop it or modify its settings because it's so central to everything, but it's there, you can see it. So, how does this work? Okay, so Kerberos generally works based on tickets. There's several different kinds of tickets. Conceptually, I'm going to break down all the parts and then I'll walk through them all step by step. Conceptually, you have an authentication server that holds the main record of all the passwords and user IDs and etc. in the network. Okay. You have a ticket granting service which can take requests and say, okay, you are actually a valid user. I'm going to give you a ticket for a service. And then you have the actual service. You have the client on the workstation. And yeah, there's lots of these. So let's walk through this step by step. When you log on to a computer, you're not actually transmitting a password across the network. Because remember, a goal of ours is to not have any passwords across the network whatsoever. So how does this work? Well, the workstation where you're signing on sends a message to the authentication server and it says, user A is logging on. And the authentication server goes, okay, user A, I have a record of what user A's password should be. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send the workstation two things. The first thing is, here is a session key for you to use, the client to use, to talk to the ticket granting service. And I'm going to encrypt this session key using the user's secret key. It's not the password. You'll typically take the user's password and transform it in some way, either by hashing it or using some other protocol to transform it. Because the authentication server knows what the user's password is, it can take the user's password, hash it, use that hash to encrypt the client to ticket granting service session key, and send that as one message. And when the workstation receives that, it knows what the user has typed in at the workstation for their password. So it can do the same thing. Take the password that was entered, take a hash of it, and try to use that to decrypt the client to ticket granting service session key. If it decrypts successfully, then it knows the user has entered the same password as was on file with the authentication server. And so it's good. If it doesn't decrypt, then the passwords didn't match, and it'll throw an error. The second message that comes from the administration server, the authentication server, is, here is a ticket granting ticket. And what this is it includes several pieces of information. This is being issued to this client at this network address. It's valid for this length of time, several pieces of information. But this is encrypted with a secret key for the ticket granting service, which means that when this gets sent to the client can't decrypt this. It is essentially a sealed package. But when the client wants to get access to a service, the client will now go to the ticket granting service. It will say, here is a ticket granting ticket that I got from the authentication service, and here is the name of the service that I want to have access granted to. Okay? This communication, one of the other things that was in the ticket granting ticket that I forgot to mention was the client to ticket granting service session key. So this is all in the ticket granting ticket that is being sent to the ticket granting service, along with the name of the service that we're trying to access. The ticket granting service uses its secret key to decrypt the ticket granting ticket. And it can see, okay, it's this client at this network address. Here's the timestamp range where this is actually valid. And I know it came from the authentication server because it's encrypted using my secret key. And here's the client to ticket granting service session key that I should use to encrypt my response back to the client. Okay. And here's the service that it's attempting to access. All right. So the ticket granting service can now put together a service ticket. This is much the same thing as the ticket granting ticket was. So, okay, I know the services, or I can calculate the services secret key. I'm going to put together a timestamp where this is valid. I'm going to put together the client information. It's this client, it's this network address, the whole smash. Encrypt the whole service ticket using the service's secret key, and then include that in a response which is itself encrypted using the client to ticket granting service session key. Way too many keys to keep track of. And this gets returned to the client. Now the client has a service ticket that it can go to the actual service it wants access to and present the service ticket and say, here's all the information. And the service can use its secret key to decrypt that. It says, okay, this is something that has been issued by the ticket granting service. This is this client, this address, this particular timestamp range for validity, and this session key for the client to service session. And it will then put together a response of a timestamp to confirm that, yes, this is actually a live response and not a captured response that's being replayed later. And it will encrypt that all using the client to service session key, which was issued by the ticket granting service. And once that has been sent, then the client knows that it has reached the right service at the right time. And this is a live response because it can compare the timestamp that it has received from the service to be sure that it is current. It is fantastically complicated. The Wikipedia article on it lays it all out, and you can see that there's 8 different messages involved in this authentication flow to make single sign-on work with just a single service, no less. And in a domain, you might have many different file servers. Each one of those is a separate service. You might have other applications that have been registered on the network, and there can be many tickets issued for each user at a domain workstation. There's tickets flying all over the place. But Kerberos is very secure because passwords are never being sent across the network. Each communication from the client to the authentication server, from the client to the ticket granting service, from the client to the service, all of these are encrypted using unique session keys. And each of these include a timestamp to make sure that it's a current live communication. This also means, however, that not only do you need to be in an environment where you can rely on a central authentication service to act as the central repository and arbiter of what passwords are valid and which ones are not, you're also relying on a key distribution center to be actually up and available at all times to make sure that tickets can be issued and granted appropriately for services through the network. You're also counting on the fact that everybody is in sync with your local clocks, because timestamps are a big part of Kerberos. And typically, the leeway within a Windows network is 5 minutes. Your clocks must be within 5 minutes of each other. If they're more than 5 minutes apart, either direction, then authentication fails because the timestamps are no longer current. There's other functions within a domain where the primary domain controller emulator actually acts as a time server and makes sure that all the workstations are updated or should be updated to have their clocks in sync with the primary domain controller. Most of the time this works, sometimes it doesn't. Or if you have multiple domains where a trust is established between the domains, possibly the primary domain controllers have their clocks out of sync with each other, and therefore cross-domain services might fail. Regardless of that, another part of this is when the client is talking to the ticket granting server, like I said, it says, I want to be granted access to this particular service. This takes the form of a service principal name, or an SPN. And so there are tools where you can manually register an SPN if your application just doesn't do it on its own, or if the application says, I don't know what SPNs are in use in your environment. Maybe you have a production service, maybe you have a test version of this service as well. I'm not going to try and assume what the service principal name should be. I'm going to let the admin have that call. If that's the case, you might have a need to use the built-in tools in Windows to set the SPN for a service account. This service, a payroll service, is going to run using this particular service account that I have created for it. I need to actually use this tool to say this service account is going to be associated with this service principal name. And once the SPN is set and registered, then the ticket granting service can actually grant you service tickets for that service. Hugely complicated. But it's also broken down like this so that all of these services can, in theory, be located in different places. Typically speaking, your ticket granting service is going to be on the same server as your key distribution center, which is typically going to be the same server as your authentication service, which means in Windows, all of these are part of your domain controller, typically speaking. And the domain controllers talk to each other to keep themselves in sync. Cool. Your service, on the other hand, might be a different place whatsoever. And that's fine. You'll have several different services. Your service might have a specific head end, essentially, and further tell the client, hey, I want you to go talk to this particular node. If it's a server farm where you have a single service name, but then there's multiple servers, that you can talk to, then you might have it broken down even further from there. But again, no passwords are being sent over the network. This is all a matter of exchanging authentication one level at a time, and it goes from there. And if you need a new ticket granting ticket, then it's easy enough for the workstation to say, hey, my ticket granting ticket is coming up on expiry. I just going to go back to the authentication service and say, hey, I need a new ticket granting ticket. And it'll say, okay, here's a new ticket granting ticket. And then you can channel it all the way down through the ticket granting server, through the service, and just renew everything behind the scenes without the user having to be further prompted. From the user's perspective, you just signed into the workstation using your password, and everything else in the domain knows that it's you. And from the network side, it's all secure. It's a very powerful protocol. It's also fantastically complicated. And typically speaking, it's not for beginners, but it gives us a good basis to look at. Here's how it works in a domain. How is this going to work on the internet? Because we're talking about the internet. We have no guarantee that devices are using clocks that are in sync with each other. We have no universal trusted third party that can act as an arbiter. But we still want to make sure that we're not transmitting passwords directly across the internet, because that would be dumb. And we want to make sure that responses are live, and we want to make sure that we're mutually authenticated. There's a lot of the same problems that we're trying to solve, but we don't have the constraints of having a central authenticating server. We don't have the constraint of everything's kept in sync with time. So there's the same problems that we need to solve, but with additional challenges when we're going over the internet. If this is something that interests you, I highly recommend looking it up and trying to go through it step by step on your own. It will probably take you more than a few tries. And in all honesty, I'm not 100% I'm not 100% sure that I've explained it all that well, if I'm honest, but I can but try, and we'll use this as a jumping off point to discuss next week some of the single sign-on protocols that you can use in an internet environment. Okay, that's it for today, and that was quite enough. If you have thoughts on other things that you'd like to hear me talk about, this was an idea submitted to me by a viewer to talk about single sign-on, so hopefully it's worthwhile as a starting point anyway. But if you have thoughts on other things that you'd like to hear me talk about, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door NetAdmin, and we will see you next time.